Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Pivot Point series. Today we're discussing Israel and West Asia and what is the future with Dr. Stanley Johny. Dr. Stanley Johny is the International Affairs Editor with The Hindu, a PhD in International Studies from the Center for West Asian Studies, JNU. He has reported from Washington, D.C., Montgomery, Moscow, Brussels, Amman, Tel Aviv, Ramallah, and Seoul. He has contributed to think tanks such as the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., and the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis in New Delhi. He's the author of three books: The ISIS Caliphate from Syria to the Doorsteps of India, The Comrades and the Mullahs, and his most recent one, The Original Sin: Israel, Palestine, and the Revenge of Old West Asia. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Smriti. Thanks for having me here.
So there's a general perception that the current war in Gaza and Lebanon began with the attack of Hamas on the 7th of October of 2023, and it forced Israel to respond with military attacks. But many scholars and leading officials are actually saying that from day one that the conflict did not start on the 7th of October, but way before that mark. In fact, the UN Secretary General also said that Hamas's attack of October 7th did not happen in vacuum. How do we see the current conflict? Is it a war of October 7th or one that is a continuing struggle of Palestinians for statehood? And is Israel's objective one of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians? And what are the main reasons for Israel's disproportionate response post October 7th? Did Hamas actually think that the huge cost of Palestinian lives was worth the risk?
If I answer quickly the questions, so I think this is the latest spell of an ongoing conflict that's been going on for quite some time, isn't it? This did not start on October 7th, of course. Uh, you know, and the occupation of the Palestinian territories has been going on for decades. The question is, why do you begin it? Some people say it began in 1948, but if you look at UN Security Council resolutions, UN General Assembly resolutions, one can clearly say that the occupation of the Palestinian territories by the State of Israel began in 1967, from June 1967 onwards. So from 1967 onwards, this has been going on, and West Bank is under Israel's direct military occupation. The Israelis withdrew from Gaza in 2005, but from 2007 onwards, Gaza has been under Israel's military blockade. This did not start on October 7. What you saw on October 7 was one of the spikes in violence, which has been going on. So you had the first Intifada, which started in the late 1980s, and then you had the second Intifada, which started in 2000, and then now you have a third round of major violence, which started on October 7. This is the historical perspective. And even in 2023, before October 7 happened, in the first 10 months, 9 to 10 months, 249 Palestinians had been killed in the West Bank alone by the Israeli forces. So there was this violence going on, and the occupation is the larger context in which on October 7, Hamas, of course, decided to launch its murderous, bloody attack in Israel. That's how the violence spiked, and Israel, started its retaliatory war, which is still been going on. And then secondly, okay, why did Hamas do this? I think if you look at it from Hamas's point of view, you can say two things. One is that the Palestine issue before October 7 had been completely sidelined in West Asia. So in 2020, four Arab countries and Israel had signed the normalization agreements. And Saudi Arabia and Israel were in a very advanced stage of normalizing agreement. Nobody was talking about the Palestinians anymore. There was no peace agreement. There was no peace talks going on between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The Americans had completely looked the other side because their focus was on the Israeli-Saudi normalization, not on the Palestinians. And the Israeli violence in the West Bank, as I pointed out earlier, 249 Palestinians had been killed in 2023 alone, before October 7. The Israeli violence against the Palestinians and the occupation were going on. So this is what I call in my latest book, Occupation Without Consequences. So this was Israel's approach. So Hamas actually wanted to bring the Palestine issue back to the forefront. And Hamas also wanted to clearly torpedo the Arab-Israel normalization process. And they brought the Palestinian issue back to the forefront, and they kind of, at least for now, the Saudi Israel normalization process is not going to happen anytime soon. So, in that sense, you can say Hamas met their objectives. But at the same time, like you asked, Hamas and the Palestinians had to pay a huge civilian cost. So, why did they do it? So I think maybe one possible explanation is that Hamas did not expect this kind of a response from the Israelis. Of course, they knew the Israelis would come and attack Gaza. They had attacked Gaza at least 4 times since 2005 in the past. The Israelis will come, bomb Gaza, cause some destruction, and pull back. But this time the Israelis decided to go for a full-fledged war on Gaza, occupy parts of the territories, and then the war is still continuing. I think this kind of a response they did not anticipate. That could be one explanation. But if you look at from their point of view, they wanted to bring the Palestinian issue to the forefront. They wanted to torpedo the Arab normalization process. They also thought that Israel was at a weak moment because there were a lot of things going on inside Israel. Protests against the Netanyahu government, the Netanyahu government's approach towards imposing new judicial reforms, etc., etc. So Israel, the society was at a particularly weak moment. That's how Hamas looked at it. So they thought this was the moment to carry out the attack. So, and if you look at Israel's disproportionate response, yeah, there are a lot of criticisms against the way Israel is continuing the attack. The UN human rights experts themselves say that the Israelis want to exterminate Palestinians in Gaza. This is the word the UN expert used. And there is a genocide case against Israel in the International Court of Justice, and the International Court of Justice issued two interim rulings. In the first one, the Court of Justice asked Israel to take measures to avoid genocidal crimes against the Palestinians. So, which means the Court of Justice was actually saying that the state of Israel has genocidal intent. If you don't have genocidal intent, I don't have to ask you to take measures to avoid genocide, right? So basically, the Court of Justice was saying that Israel has genocidal intent. And then the second ruling, the court asked Israel to halt operations in Rafah, which came months ago, but operations in Gaza are still going on. So, and if you look at other expert commentary, for example, if you listen to John Mearsheimer, the famous American realist, John Mearsheimer calls it ethnic cleansing. He calls the Israeli state an apartheid state. And how do you resolve the problem of apartheid? You resolve the problem of apartheid by basically, if you look at the South African model, by restoring equal rights to everybody, including the Israelis and the Palestinians. But Israel is not ready to do that. Israel cannot give equal rights to the Palestinians living under occupation. It doesn't want to end the occupation. So how do you resolve the problem of apartheid? By carrying out ethnic cleansing. This is John Mearsheimer's argument. So my point of view is that there are widespread criticisms against the way Israel is carrying out the attack. The UN experts is saying that Israel is trying to exterminate Palestinians. Experts, including Professor John Mearsheimer, says that Israel is carrying out a campaign to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. So yeah, you have very strong criticisms against the way the war is being conducted.
So while Hamas's killing of Israeli civilians on 7th is condemned, Israel attack, like you said, is seen as genocidal by the larger world community, and the fact that even ICJ asked them not to conduct such activities shows. The Gaza Strip has been destroyed completely after the attack, and it's now totally unlivable for human beings. There are nearly almost 50,000 civilians that have been killed by Israelis. A large number of this proportion is of women and children. The UN, while clearly saying Israel is committing genocide and war crimes, has been incapable of stopping the conflict or at least negotiating with either of the parties. Whom do we hold accountable here for the conflict and for the deaths that have occurred? Is it the UN? And is the UN actually treading the same path as the League of Nations? Or has the US, through its Security Council veto, made the UN irrelevant in today's context?
So, I think when it comes to conflict resolution, as a student of IR, I have always argued that the role of the UN is limited, especially when the great powers are involved in a conflict, isn't it? Yes, UN is seen helpless, toothless when it comes to Israel Palestine or when it comes to Ukraine Russia. So the main argument is that if great powers are involved in a conflict, it's very difficult for the UN to do an effective mediation or an assertive role in bringing the conflict to an end. This has always been the case, right? Whether you go back to the Soviet invasions or the American invasions of the past, even during the Cold War era, or you look at the post Cold War unilateral interventions or invasions made by the United States, for example, in the case of Iraq War, there was no UN Security Council resolution at all, but the United States still went ahead invading Iraq, which was also a sovereign independent country. You look at the case of Libya. The UN Security Council resolution clearly mandated only the enforcement of a no-fly zone, but NATO actually went for a full throttle invasion of Libya in 2011. So the UN had been misused in the past, or UN had been left as a spectator in the past by great powers. You look at the case of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, because the United Nations cannot even pass a resolution because Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, right? And when it comes to Israel's atrocities in the Palestinian territories, how many UN Security Council resolutions are there, starting from the 1967 resolution? Resolutions that asked Israelis to pull back from all the occupied territories, including Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Golan Heights, Sinai Peninsula. Israel withdrew from Sinai Peninsula through the Camp David Accord, not because of the UN Security Council resolution. And all the other territories Israel captured in 1967 are still controlled and occupied by the Israelis. Interestingly, the United States has even recognized Golan Heights as part of Israeli territory, which is, according to, if you look at the international law, it is an occupied territory. So, the role of UN has always been limited, and the main reason is that there are two reasons. One, if you are a realist of international relations, United Nations is not a supranational authority. It is just a platform for international, the units of international system, nation states to come together, deliberate, and then take decisions collectively for the future course of action. So it's not a supranational authority. It's not a super policeman. So the UN structurally has very limited space to make an intervention. Secondly, when great powers are involved, only their interests will be protected. In the case of Israel, Israel is protected and supported by the United States. And the United States always uses its veto power. And not just its veto power, the United States continues to enable and support Israel's war in Gaza. So the United States has spent roughly $20 billion in just 12 months to support Israel's defense over the last 12 months, right? And the United States will block any international effort to sanction Israel at the global fora. And the United States had even threatened, some US senators had even threatened to take action against the International Criminal Court, ICC prosecutor who demanded an arrest warrant against Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. He made the request months ago and there was no action at all because the United States uses its pressure. Whereas the ICC has already issued an arrest warrant against President Putin, and everybody welcomed that. Everybody in the West welcomed that. But the United States threatened action against the ICC prosecutor if he went ahead with his demand to issue an arrest warrant against Prime Minister Netanyahu, right? So Israel is always protected by the United States diplomatically, militarily, politically, financially. And as long as that support remains, the UN's space is very, very limited. That's what we are witnessing.
So, in context of Iran and Israel, Iran attacked Israel's military sites using 200 ballistic missiles, which most of which Israel intercepted. And Israel also responded by attacking Iranian military sites on the 26th of October. Iran has now said that it will respond with a punishing attack on Israel. Is it now likely to become an uncontrolled escalation, or has it already become an uncontrolled escalation? And is the USA abetting Israel's wider war in the region? With Israel being an unofficial nuclear state and Iran supposedly having gone nuclear, can this escalation engulf the whole of West Asia under a wider war?
So if there is an all-out war between Israel and Iran, it will be disastrous for the whole region. No, there is no doubt about it. Israel has higher conventional capabilities, greater conventional capabilities, and Israel is also backed by the United States, which means Israel's defense is taken care of by the United States. Iran launched two direct attacks against Israel, right? The first was on April the 13th, and the second one was October the 1st. And on both occasions, the United States played a very interesting, very critical role in defending Israel, whereas Iran is left to itself. So Iran has to defend itself. Iran has to do whatever it has to do on its own, right? There is no great power coming to Iran's defense or Iran's to help Iran's offense. Whereas Israel is defended by the United States, and Israel is actually helped by the United States in its offensive operations because most of the advanced weapons the Israelis are using are made by the Americans. And the United States make sure that the supply chain remains intact so that Israel would not face any scarcity for major offensive weapons. Right? And the United States even deployed its THAAD anti-missile defense system just a few weeks ago, which is aimed at bolstering Israel's defensive shield further stronger. So this is how the balance of power, existing in the region. But this hasn't become an uncontrolled war yet because the Iranians, they launched two attacks against Israelis. They targeted largely only Israel's military facilities. The first attack was mostly intercepted, but I think in the second attack, Iranians actually hit a couple of Israeli military bases, including the Nevatim base. And Israel has censored any report on Nevatim ever since the attack, since October 1st. So media is not allowed to visit the base or report about it. So Israel has actually taken some hit on October the 1st. But then, and then when the Israelis carried out their retaliatory attack on October 26th, again, before the attack, there were talks about Israel attacking Iran's nuclear facilities, oil fields, or economic infrastructure, including ports, etc., etc. But the Israelis also limited their attack to the military facilities, only military sites. So both sides they are escalating the conflict, but even in escalation, they are showing restraint. So it hasn't become an uncontrolled war yet. The question is what the Iranians are going to do next. I think there are enough evidence or enough statements made by Iran's top leaders that suggest that Iran will carry out a retaliatory attack. When? We don't know. Maybe after the US presidential election, it's likely to take place in a couple of days. So the Iranians from Iran's president, from the Quds Force chief, from the IRGC chief to the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, everybody has said that they will retaliate. So what we have to wait and see is what the Iranians are going to do next and how the Israelis are going to respond to the Iranian attack. So as of now, what we have is a shooting match between Iran and Israel. And if it goes out of control, I think that will be really, really disastrous because Iran sits on the mouth of Strait of Hormuz, which is a very important, artery for the global oil trade. And Iran apparently, the IRGC-linked Telegram channels had earlier said that if Israel targeted Iran's oil facilities, the Iranians will target oil facilities across the Gulf, which will sink the global economy into chaos. And if that happens, the United States could be drawn into the conflict. Imagine if the United States starts bombing Iranian facilities and Iran and its allies will start attacking American bases in the region because West Asia has a lot of American bases. And Iran will also try to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, which will again sink global oil trade into depths. So this is basically an apocalyptic scenario, an all-out war between the Iranians and the Israelis, which is not good for anybody. I don't think the Americans want this because that will mean greater inflation and will drag the United States into another war in West Asia. I don't think the Indians want it. Imagine if the Gulf is on fire, oil prices will go up, and millions of Indians are living across the Gulf on the Arabian coast. So that will, create greater risks for India as well. So I think at this point of time, the only country that is okay with an escalation, an all-out war is Israel. Because Israel thinks that it can drag the United States into the war. It is in nobody else's interest at this point of time. We will see what will Iran's next response be and what the Iranians would do in its retaliation. I think a lot would depend on their actions.
Is it also strange that many of the Arab states remain mostly mute witnesses to the killings in Gaza and Lebanon? And countries like South Africa are calling Israel a genocidal and apartheid state, like you said, while Arab states like Saudi, Egypt, Jordan, and the UAE remain mostly silent about the killings there. What are the reasons for the inaction of these Arab states to defend their fellow Arabs in Palestine?
See, this is nothing new because the Arabs had indicated long time ago that the Palestine issue is no longer an Arab-Israel issue. The Palestine issue is basically an Israel-Palestine issue. So Arabs in the past had fought war with Israel over Palestine. That time is gone. Arabs are no longer interested in going to war with Israel on behalf of the Palestinians, right? So I will say that basically Israel had established its deterrence against, or Israel had turned the Arab Israel conflict, turned the corner in the Arab Israel conflict in 1967 onwards. After 1967, only one Arab country attacked Israel, which was Egypt in 1973. And Egypt attacked Israel in 1973 not for Palestinians but for Sinai Peninsula, which was an Egyptian territory. And ever since, no Arab country, basically after 1967, no Arab country had fought for the Palestinians, fought the Israelis on behalf of the Palestinians. So this was a shift that was in the making for a long, long time. And then what you saw in 1978, Egypt normalized ties with Israel. 1994, Jordan normalized ties with Israel. And in 2020, the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco normalized ties with Israel, of which we can keep Sudan out of it because the country is at war with itself. But Israel's normalization agreements with all the other Arab countries are still standing. And not just Arab countries, you look at Turkey. Turkey is very much critical of Israel's foreign policy, right? Erdogan is very vocal. But even Turkey has not completely suspended its bilateral relationship with Israel. So I'm not talking about fighting a war with Israel, but even when it comes to maintaining the diplomatic relationship, most of the Arab countries, what they have done, okay, they may have recalled their ambassadors, but they had maintained more or less their status quo. Arab countries or Turkey, they maintain more or less their status quo with the state of Israel. So nobody has the stomach for a conflict with Israel. That is one thing. And then, secondly, I think the role of the United States is very, very important here. Because if you look at the Gulf countries, whether it is Saudi Arabia, UAE, even Qatar, so all of these countries are American allies, right? Qatar is hosting some 10,000 American troops. The United States has military presence and military bases in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And Jordan is a country that has most of its population are of Palestinian origin. But Jordan issues strong statements. Jordan's foreign minister asks Israel to stop ethnic cleansing, etc., etc. But Jordan is the country that shot down Iranian missiles that were going to Israel. So Jordan actually joined the American coalition to shoot down Iranian missiles. Basically, the American coalition to protect the state of Israel. That's what the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan did on April the 13th. And again, on October the 1st, right? So that is also because Jordan is a very close ally of the United States. These kingdoms, they cannot actually violate, they can actually flout America's red lines. You look at the case of Egypt. Egypt has taken, the war is actually taking place on Egyptian border, on the Sinai border. And Egypt had also issued strong statements, but beyond that, they haven't done anything. So I think Arab countries are more or less constrained. They don't want to escalate the conflict with Israel. They don't even want to disrupt their status quo with Israel. And okay, yeah, of course, they are concerned about the plight of the Palestinians, but I don't think they are in the mood to do anything. And on the contrary, it is Iran which is challenging Israel. Iran is a Shia majority country. So not the Arabs. And Iran is not Arab, right? They are Persians and ethnically they are different. Even religiously, they are coming from a different sect. They are a Shia majority country. And it is Iran that is challenging Israel, whereas Arab countries, which at one point of time had taken the Palestinian cause, are issuing only verbal statements. That's it. So this is the situation of West Asia today.
And much of the world, particularly the global south, is very concerned about the human catastrophe that happens in Gaza at the moment. And it's viewing Israel as a pariah state. Given our close relations, India has not made any criticism as such of Israel's actions. So, how will India, which is an important power in the emerging world order, be seen by the rest of the world on its current stand on the Israel Palestine issue?
Yeah, so India has taken a balanced position as of now. What I can see is that if you look at India's voting records at the UN, India has supported the Palestinian cause. So there were at least six UN resolutions, so of which India voted in favor of a resolution that called for a ceasefire, another resolution that condemned Israel's settlements in the West Bank, and another resolution that condemned Israel's continuing occupation of Syria's Golan Heights. And India also supported a resolution that recognized the Palestinian right to self determination. Whereas India abstained from two resolutions, the first vote, which called for a ceasefire, India said that vote did not condemn the October 7 attack. And then the last vote, which asked Israel to end occupation within 2 years. So India says you can't set the timelines. So overall, if you look at India's voting records, India supports the Palestinian cause. But at the same time, as you pointed out, India stops short of condemning Israel, you know. And this, I think, is largely in line with India's position vis-a-vis conflicts, because if you look at India's position towards Russia's invasion of Ukraine, India doesn't condemn Russia. India says it supports, sovereignty, territorial integrity, etc., which were indirect criticism of the war. But at the same time, directly India doesn't condemn Russia because India sees Russia as a close partner. I think here also, what has changed over the last, let's say, 30 years is that Israel has emerged as a key partner, which was not the case in the 1980s or 1970s during the Cold War. During the Cold War, India was a vocal champion of the Palestinian cause. That has changed from the 1990s onwards, right? Because India established full diplomatic relations, India saw the balance of power has changed. Soviet Union disappeared. The United States became the stronger power. Israel is the closest ally of the United States. The world order was shifting, so India also changed its policy towards the United States as well as towards Israel in the region. So ever since, India has been trying to build stronger ties with Israel. Now, if you look at India's relationship with Israel, it has a strong, component of cooperation in intelligence sharing, defense technologies, agricultural technologies, etc., etc. While at the same time, India has two more pillars in its West Asia policy. One is its ties with the Arab world, and the other its ties with Iran. Right? Okay, the Iranians might not be happy with India's position, but Arabs are okay. I don't see any Arab leader criticizing India's position vis-a-vis Israel-Palestine, right? Because the Arabs themselves, as we discussed earlier, Arabs themselves are not very, very hot about this topic. Okay, they are criticizing Israel's invasion. That's it. They don't go beyond that. So Indians also do. So India doesn't face any major heat or pressure from the Arab world, which was not the case during the Cold War. So India sees that there is a wider space for India to maintain its relationship irrespective of Israel's atrocities in Gaza. India doesn't face any major pressure coming from the Arab world, right? So this is more about more or less real politic. It's not about moral politic. Okay, if you are questioning the moral footing of India's foreign policy, yes, you can actually question that, criticize that. But I think India's policy is more or less driven by its own real political understanding. But if you look at the voting record, yes, India has voiced its support for the Palestinian cause, but the moral content is missing in its foreign policy, because countries in global south, including Brazil or South Africa or other countries, they have taken a much stronger position. South Africa has taken Israel to the World Court. Compared to that, India is silent. India is silent. But at the same time, India is part of the BRICS communique, which used very harsh message against Israel's war, right? So when it comes to the groupings, whether it is BRICS, SCO, etc., India supports its communique criticizing Israel's war, but bilaterally India remains silent. So what you can say is that more or less India retains its balancing position towards the conflict.
At a juncture where the Middle East is embroiled in such an intense conflict, Iran and Saudi have conducted joint military exercises in the Red Sea. And the Red Sea is a route which has been controlled by Iran backed Houthis for a very long time. The two countries have also historically backed opposing sides in regional conflicts and also as a part of their own foreign policies. What is this shift that we are seeing? Is it stimulated by the conflict that's ongoing there, or is it an alliance that's in the making? And what will be the future of West Asia?
I think the future and the present of West Asia are bleak, to put it simply. I don't see any end of the tunnel. It's going on. The current instability, I think, will go on for quite some time, or it could even, the scene could even get darker. And I think it's too early to say whether the Iranians and the Saudis are going into an alliance, but the Saudis are clearly hedging. It's very evident between two sides. The Saudis are clearly upset with the United States, and they have their own concerns about Israel, right? And if the Saudis were in a very advanced position of normalizing ties with Israel in September 2023, we can today say that the normalization is not happening anytime soon. The Saudi foreign minister and as well as the Saudi prime minister, who's also the crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, had clearly said that they still want to normalize ties with Israel, but only if a clear path towards the creation of a Palestinian state based on the 1967 border, with East Jerusalem being the capital, is open. So unless there is a path towards this, there is not, we are not going to have peace with Israel. This is what MBS as well as the Saudi government has said. So, but at the same time, I would say that the Saudis cannot move completely away from the Americans. They are closely aligned with the United States, militarily, politically, etc., etc. So the Saudis, but at the same time, they don't want an open confrontation with the Iranians either. So that's why Saudi Arabia reached some kind of a detente with Iran under the negotiations brokered by the Chinese, right? So the Saudis see the region changing. So the West Asia is, yes, the United States remains the most powerful, most influential power in the region, but you have other actors as well. The Russians are there, the Chinese are there, right? So the Chinese would try to hedge between different powers, but that doesn't mean that they might go in for an alliance with the Iranians. What they are trying to do, maybe one possible explanation is that even in the event of an open war between the Israelis and the Iranians, the Saudis want to send the message to the Iranians that we are not a part of this conflict. We are staying out of it. So this is the message they are trying to do. They don't want to get drawn into a war between Iran and Israel, particularly at a time Israel is continuing its disastrous war on the Palestinians in Gaza as well as the Lebanese in southern Lebanon. So they want to sit out of this conflict. This is the message they are trying to do. And I think they are in touch with not just the Saudis, the Emiratis are also constantly in touch with the Iranians. So they clearly send the message that we are not joining this war. They have also told the Americans that don't use our territory in case if there is an open war between these two sides. So they want to sit out of it. This is the message they are trying to do. And they also want to hedge, they also want to balance between two sides. They don't want to join any side.
My final small question. The title of your book, The Original Sin, is very intriguing. And may I just know why you named your book as The Original Sin?
Yeah, you read the book and then I hope you will have an answer why it's called Original Sin. But my central thesis is that it's related to your first question. The central thesis of the book is that this did not begin on October 7th. So history did not begin on October 7th. That's a central thesis. So the book, I was in Calicut the other day at the Manorama Lit Fest. So we unveiled the cover of the book in Calicut just 2 days ago. The book is available for pre-order on Amazon, but the hard copy is not out yet. So I hope it will be out by November 30th. The hard copies will be available in bookshops by November 30th.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Pivot Point series by the Peninsula Foundation. We had a wonderful conversation with you, and I'm so grateful that you could make it here. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Smriti. Thank you very much.